Back to our top story. Iran says that they are not responsible for this weekend's massive drone attacks on two Saudi Arabia oil facilities. This after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo directly blamed Tehran. For more on this, we're going to bring in Hudson Institute senior fellow and former intelligence officer Michael Pregent. Michael, the Secretary of State, some people have been very critical of him coming out and saying this early on that Iran is responsible for this, but you believe he's spot on. Why?
I believe he's spot on because it is the Islamic Republic that provided the training, the lethal aid, and the capability to not only Iraqi militias, but also the Houthis. I believe Iran, without a doubt, is responsible for this attack through, again, providing lethal aid and training these proxies on how to do exactly this.
And so what are you basing this off of? I know you can't give us too much information, but can you help us understand what kind of evidence the Secretary of State might be looking at when he makes this kind of determination?
Well, if we look at the last drone attack that happened on a Saudi pipeline, it turns out it came from southern Iraq. It was a militia, Kitab Hezbollah. And Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, was able to get the Houthis to take credit for it. But it was launched from southern Iraq. And this capability, they have a drone that can go about 600 miles, that can drop munitions, and they've had several successful attacks. But the Yemeni Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen are just outside of the range of this attack. So that puts it in Iraq, in southern Iraq, just based off the range of this attack and the capability.
You think the drones had to launch or originate from southern Iraq in order to
Most likely, just based on the on the range. 600 miles is a long way to go, and the further you have to go, the less accurate you will be. And these were very accurate strikes on this Aramco facility.
What do you make of the sophistication of this attack? 10 drones traveling this far to be able to avoid detection and actually effectively hit its targets. What does this signal to you?
Well, they know how to take advantage of Saudi Arabia's air defense systems. They can fly under the radar. They can put a capability in that the Patriots are not set up for.
And we knew that they had these drones, but this is the first time that they've actually deployed them at this kind of scale, right?
Well, the second time at this kind of scale. And now the first one came from southern Iraq. They've been able to launch drone attacks, but they haven't been successful on southern Saudi Arabia from Yemen. But these successful attacks against the oil pipelines in this Aramco facility are from southern Iraq. It looks that way just based off the ranges. And it's definitely Iran that's responsible for this. Not without a doubt, the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, is responsible for this.
So, a lot of people are wondering why now. We had this Democratic Congresswoman on, Katie Hill, earlier in the show, and she said it just doesn't make sense because President Trump and the Trump administration is dangling the possibility of meeting with the Iranian President Rouhani at the UN General Assembly later this week. So she's wondering why now?
Well, why now? Remember, Prime Minister Abe was sitting with the Supreme Leader with Rouhani when the IRGC attacked a Japanese oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. That's why. It also will allow Rouhani not to have that handshake in New York. They want to embarrass the relationship. Remember, it was the IRGC that seized 12 U.S. sailors on the eve of ratification of the Iran deal in January of 2016. And the same question was asked, why would they do that? Well, they do it to derail. There's a hardline group within the IRGC that does not want to see any rapprochement with the U.S. And they tend to do these things. And it's also embarrassing. Look at what Zarif did to Macron before landing at the G7. Macron tries to set up this back-channel meeting, and before Zarif lands, he says, ballistic missiles are off the table. We're not going to talk about regional behavior. We're not going to talk about ending sunset clauses. This is just what Iran does.
So how do you see this playing out? You have Senator Lindsey Graham calling for possibly an attack, a retaliatory attack on Iranian oil refineries, a type of attack that would, quote, break the regime's back. You think that's possible? That's really potentially in the pipeline?
It's something President Reagan did back then. But I think as we look at the intelligence over the next week, as it basically narrows where this attack came from, we're going to be able to put pressure on the government in Iraq, on Baghdad, on Tehran. And you have Kuwaiti media, eyewitnesses saying that the attack came from the north. It flew over Kuwaiti airspace into Saudi Arabia. And that's crucial because it's actually uniting. UAE is kind of strayed a little bit away from Saudi Arabia, and this is kind of bringing them back into the fold. This is a brazen attack on a U.S. ally from a dedicated enemy. And I know everybody talks about Saudi Arabia and Iran. One's a necessary ally, and one's a dedicated enemy. And this attack was meant to embarrass the kingdom and also embarrass U.S.
You say
strategy in the region.
You say it's a brazen attack, but as somebody who has followed this part of the world for so long, were you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. I want to be surprised. I want to be surprised. But if you hear from a lot of the, I call them cheerleaders on Iraq, they're surprised that Iraq has gotten this bad to the point where Israel is conducting airstrikes on Iraqi militias in Iraq, and the Iraqi people aren't protesting. Analysts on Iraq and Iran are surprised by this, but they shouldn't be. This is exactly what the Islamic Republic does.
All right, Michael Pregent, thank you
Thanks
so much for
having
coming
me.
in and sharing your insights. Really appreciate
Go
it.
Cowboys. Thanks.
Hey, I'm from Texas, so I'll shake your hand
I'm
on
from El Paso.
that. Nice.
All right, great.
All right.